Here's the president of FASA saying this. I'm in the retail business. I sell animals for a living to be hunted. If I don't have animals on my shelves, I don't make money. But put and take is a reality. It is something that will never change. And I tell you now, there are people that's gonna, when this podcast go out, I'm gonna get death threats.
All right, so let's talk about hypocrisy for a second. If you've ever hunted in South Africa, or even just looked into it, you've probably come across groups like Hunt South Africa, Dark Continent, and the usual lineup of self-proclaimed gatekeepers, as I like to call them. These are the guys running Facebook groups claiming to vet outfitters and preaching nonstop about what qualifies as real hunting. And one thing they're very clear on, they actively preach against the practice of put and take, or drop and shoot as they call it. They don't consider it fair chase, they don't consider it ethical, and they push the narrative that outfitters who use it should be avoided at all costs. According to them, the only acceptable hunts are 100% fair chase, and if you're restocking animals, releasing game, or managing inventory like a business, you're doing it the wrong way. Now, let me be clear. I support fair chase. Always have. Always will. But I also understand how this industry actually works. You see, put and take is not some dirty little secret. It's practical, legal, and more importantly, sustainable management tool in South Africa. African outfitters aren't magicians. If you've got 20, 30, 40 clients coming through each season, and you want to maintain trophy quality, you can't just sit back and hope the genetics survive. You have to manage your land. You have to restock. You have to treat your animals and your operation like a long-term business. Otherwise, it's going to fail. That's not unethical. It's responsible. And pretending otherwise, it's just ignorance or marketing, which brings us to the fun part. You see, these same groups, the ones who rail against put and take, are the first to praise FASA, the Professional Hunters Association of South Africa. They prop up the executive committee. They promote and hunt with Lex Strauss. And they sure as hell don't have a problem with Tony de Bruin, the current president of FASA. So, what does Tony do? He runs a put and take operation. And in the next 30 minutes, he lays it all out, openly, unapologetically, and in detail. So here's the question. If put and take is so unacceptable, are these groups against 95% of South African outfitters? Or maybe just the ones who won't give them free hunts and kickbacks? That's not conservation, that's just performance. Oh, and by the way, FASA asked me not to release this clip, said it might look bad, and of course, I agreed. This is Tony de Bruin, the president of FASA, telling the truth about how the hunting industry really works in South Africa. Roll the tape.
Welcome to Salt Lick Worldwide Podcast, your ultimate destination for hunting, fishing, conservation, and gear. From international hotspots to the backwoods of America, we bring you the real stories, raw opinions, and the conversations others won't have. Buckle up. The adventure starts now.
But yeah, obviously on the Hunt South Africa site, and there's several other sites very similar to that on social media now. The big thing now that it comes up, it seems like every week, is what has been termed the put and take practice, and where captive bred animals are released specifically for hunting. Now the argument is that it undermines the fair chase principles. So my question to you is, one, do you believe that's absolute? Number two, how does FASA regulate that practice? And three, does it make it a canned hunt because the animal was bred somewhere else and brought in? And then four, and I think more importantly, there's an awful lot of people in South Africa that say they do not participate in put and take. My argument to that is, how in the can you sustain a profitable business if you shoot out all your animals because you're having clients in there every week? So you tell me how it's possible to function without bringing new stock in. Those are my 4 right back to back. Let's go.
You must now just keep me in line if I drift off, that we go back and that I answer all of them. So
gotcha.
Number one, on my property is 2,000 acres. No, 2,000 hectares, about 4,000 acres. I hunt in the Northern Cape alone about 650 trophies a year. All right. To breed 650 trophies, I must have 50,000 acres, and I must have herds of, to hunt 10 buffalo, I need to have 100 cows with heifers. We did the math. 50 cows, 20 heifers, and then by the end of the day, you're going to have 150 buffalo to produce 10 bulls a year. So it's impossible. So the first thing I want to tell you is honesty. If you are honest with your client from day one, from the moment your client gets here, you tell him what you are doing and how it works, how the conservation method of South Africa works. So it doesn't matter who and what you are. If you have 10 clients a year, only 10, and you have 10,000 hectares, you can maybe sustainably hunt your 10 clients. After that, there's no way you can do that. You can sustainably hunt 10 or 20 buffaloes on 5,000 hectares every year if you only have buffalo. The moment you start adding a species to this process, the reality is it doesn't work. So, it is understandable that everybody has their own way of marketing. So, a good friend of mine that passed away a few years ago is Eastern Cape guy, and we will go on the FASA group and he will say something about free range hunting. And he will say, but I have 15,000 hectares, it's 30,000 acres. It is as close as free range as you can get. Then I would go, yes, you still go through a gate. You still close the gate. And you can't drive up infinity without not seeing a gate. The reality is we are all fenced. Doesn't matter if it's 6 feet, 10 feet, 20 feet, what the hell, it's all fenced. It is our success story. Number two, a guy like Jules of the Karoo, Uncle Julian, he has 80,000 acres. You hunt at Julius springbuck. He has 5 to 10,000 springbuck. You go onto that land, you can sustainably hunt 200 springbuck a year. And then he sells another 200 to 300 to guys like me. Every year, in February, he captures his game. He captures white springbuck, black springbuck, copper springbuck, all the groups of color phases you can think of. And I go there long before the hunting season starts here at my place. And I go buy 15 white, 10 black, 20 copper, because I know what I have. And I replenish my herds. I have white females, I have black females, I have copper females, I have common females. But I every year go and buy 40 to 50 springbuck from Jules of the Karoo. And I selectively buy big rams, 18-inch rams and 17-inch rams. And listen, I put a tag in the ear because I don't want my hunters to kill that. Any PH and any client running here on my property sees an 18-inch ram, he's dead. I mean, he must just sniff into the air. There's 20 bullets on him, he's dead. His life expectancy is less than half a day. So to make sure that genes stay on my land and that the little bit of 100 or 200 females I have gets bred by the ones that survive, because the only ones that survive is the ones with the tags. You understand? That is it. That is my way of doing QDMA, quality deer management. I mean, you guys have the same thing. You sit in your tree stand on your 400 acres. You see this whitetail from a 1-year-old growing. Every year he becomes bigger and bigger and bigger. By the time he's 4 or 5 years old, you already got the itchy. You know he's got to be 150. But you know if you leave him another year, and then you hear your neighbor, 2, and you never see him on your
Were you secretly listening? Were you secretly listening to Stafford and I's phone call about 30 minutes ago?
No. Your neighbor killed him. If it's brown, it's down, Baba. Now it happens here as well. So we must manage our wildlife. So I deliberately put tags in some of my animals to protect them. And my PHs know this year, the one guy came, he says, Uncle Tony, can we have the red tag this year? There's a black ram on my land with a red tag. He's been here 2 years. I said, you know what? He's now 6 years old. Life expectancy of a springbok is 5 to 7 years. He's done. This year, you can shoot the red tag. Guess what? Red tag is still alive, baby. He's been here for 5 years. He knows the story. But the reality is,
it's like every whitetail in the world. As soon as that first gunshot goes off on opening morning, they are totally different animals after that. You'll have them walking under your tree stand, walking 10 foot from you, but the first gunshot that rings out, the jig is up. Yep, they know.
And so I have friends that's going to be pissed with me saying this because they are true purists, and they are purists. They hunt quotas on all the land. They manage the land. You will hear guys say something like, I'm a sole concession owner. Now, if you're a sole concession owner and you're the guy that looks after that guy's land, and I've had the privilege of hunting on one chunk of land for 15 years, non-stop, just me alone, then you can increase the trophy quality. You can tell your PHs, if you shoot a kudu bull and he's got a white or a gray mark on his base, you're going to get screwed because I want my kudus to be mature. In Mozambique, in the Maramiu concession where I hunt, if a PH shoots a sable with less than 1.5 inch post, he gets $1,000 fine because a 1.5 inch post means the sable is approximately 6 to 7 years old. And that means he started breeding at 4.5, and he at least bred for 2 to 3 years. If he's a good or a bad sable, doesn't matter. You let your sables grow to that age before you hunt them. Then you will increase your trophy quality. But in that same concession, we hunt inside the swamp buffalo, and you get to a herd of 1,000 or 400 buffalo, and you glass. And what are you going to do? You're going to glass and look for the big ones. And then the client's going to go, there. Number 251st from the left. You look, oh, yes. Oh, it's a monster. But there's 400 buffaloes. So if you keep on shooting those big bulls in a free-range environment, at the end of the day, after 20 years, you only shoot 36-inch buffalo. That's your average. Now, in South Africa, because our way of doing business, because of people with breeding facilities. Now, this is not pen-raised deer. I've been to places in Wisconsin, in Philadelphia, in Texas. There's a lot of states that can legally pen-raise deer. Then you have a 20-acre or a 40 or a 50-acre block with 20 females and one Christmas tree with 17 drop tines with 15 forks. I mean, it's 400 class. What? You know? And they have to cut the antlers off because the thing will break his neck if a fly flies in and he shakes his head. That is not here. I can personally say that. I had the privilege of living on one of the best breeders in South Africa, Tembani Wildlife. He's part of the stud game breeders group, and there are 7 or 8 stud game breeders. And then there's another groupings all over our country that is world-class breeders. And now we're talking stud. So you're talking like the Brahman or the big sheep or whatever world-class guys. Those guys breed for quality and for breeding purposes. But they have excess. They still produce 100 sables. those 100 sables will end up all over South Africa every year. All right? He has to get rid of them. He can't keep them all. He only keeps 10 or 20% of his population. The rest he sells. So what I did from my side, and this is what I think would be the ultimate point to reach. SCI has something called estate rules. Estate rule says the property has to be 1,000 acres or bigger. It has to have natural water sources. In South Africa, natural will never exist. We pump water. But it has to have water sources. And there must be enough habitat for the animals to have successfully be able to hide and to elude the hunter. All right. Then it's considered to be a state rule, and then it's 100% correct. And you can hunt the animal. You can shoot the world record sable. He, to be precise, he was shot about 2 or 3 years ago. I saw him grow up, and by the time he was hunted, he was 57 inches. All right? And the client paid $150,000 to hunt that animal because it's the world number one. And that is what it is. So that client didn't come for the experience, brother. He came for the horn length. All right. I have a client. He lives in Houston, Texas. He's an exceptional person. He has trophy rooms 10 times bigger than my lodge. He phones me and he says, Tony, I want a 16-inch crocodile. Where can you get me one? And I go, sir, we can go to Cabora Bassa, or we can go there or there. We're going to walk 5 or 6 miles a day and sit at waterholes. He says, no. Tony, I'll shoot it in a tub as long as it's 16 feet and longer. And he doesn't ask me how much. He knows he's going to pay for that, and he knows that it was bred in South Africa. He's hunting the 16-inch crocodile he wanted. He already hunted the wild one. Now he hunts the inches. And that's what he does. And you cannot change that. But put and take is a reality. It is something that will never change. And I tell you now, there are people that's going to, when this podcast goes out, I'm going to get death threats. There are purists that can really, really be pure about his business. I can tell you just from my side. So here's the president of FASA saying this. I'm in the retail business. I sell animals for a living to be hunted. If I don't have animals on my shelves, I don't make money. All right. This industry can only exist if the three of you send clients to South Africa every year and hunt our animals. So the reality is, I just spoke to somebody today. He has 12,000 acres in the Eastern Cape. He has one black rhino bull on that 12,000 acres. Every time he puts another bull in, that bull kills that bull. So he needs to hunt that bull. So he needs a permit to hunt it. For the last 3 years, our country didn't issue black rhino hunting permits. So he's been losing rhinos consistently. He's a purist. You're going to go on 12,000 acres and hunt one black rhino. It will be an amazing hunt, an unbelievable hunt. But is it sustainable? No, it's not. You come to me, or you come to anybody in South Africa and you book a white rhino hunt, you're going to hunt between another 20 or 30 or 40 rhino bulls. They're going to be all sorts of sizes, and you're going to walk with your PH and the guy from that land, and he's going to show you rhinos, and you're going to walk and stalk, and you're going to get blisters, and you're going to have the time of your life. But those rhinos are looked after. They are in that 2,000-acre area, highly protected, 17 sets of fences, electronic eyes, motion sensors, all sorts of shit. At night, there's people with thermals flying over it to protect those rhinos. But the reality is that is what it is. And you cannot anywhere else in Africa come and hunt a rhino like that for the money you're going to pay for it. And that is the difference. But it's up to me and you to make a difference and to make sure that you tell your outfitter the way you want your experience. You know, when the guys get here to camp and they sit in camp, I say, guys, you come from Utah, you come from Wisconsin. Wisconsin says you're not allowed to hunt from a vehicle or around a vehicle. The gun needs to be in a gun case. Now, these days, you can at least have a round in the magazine in a gun case in your car. But in Texas, you can drive with a gun on the back seat. It's fine. You know, so every state has its rules. So in Texas, they shoot off high racks. You know, they shoot from those big high racks. So that is a Texas way of hunting. Mobile stalking is like what I call it. And I had some
the mobile blind,
you know. But here's the thing. The client gets to camp and you tell the client, listen, we bring animals into our land. We bring them, what I try to do is I buy young sables at 2 years old. I leave them here for 3 or 4 years until they mature. But I cannot afford to let that sable stay on my land till he's 8 or 9 years old. I'm not here to breed it. It's going to stay until it's a trophy and it's going to get hunted. And if it's 4 years old and it doesn't look like it's going to become great, then I will tell a client, there's my PHs know all the 15 or 20 or 30 sables on the land. They're going to say, Uncle Tony, there's one bull there in the corner. He's not great. I go look at him and I go, oh, no, I know that bull. Yes, that bull is special. He's less than a kudu. He has to go tomorrow because why must I keep a little stumpy bull that's going to stab a 50-inch bull to death? It doesn't matter. It will happen eventually. So the reality is this. You tell your clients in camp, how do you want to hunt? What's the experience you want? You're a professional hunter. You tell your client, or the client says, I had a guy from New Mexico. He's a sheep hunter. He said to my PH, he wants to walk and stalk. And he wants to climb mountains. So I met the guy already in America. I know him. So I booked him a young 25-year-old PH that is fit and that is strong. And they hunted the mountains. And at day 4, one morning I came for breakfast. Client was sleeping at 9 o'clock. Why? That young boy kicked his ass. That's how it is. Because that's his experience he wanted. I will never forget a client comes to camp and tells Steph, he doesn't want cell phones, no GPS, no vehicle. He wants a compass. He wants to walk out of camp and hunt. All right? At day 3, he has not shot anything yet. He says he thinks using a vehicle to move between A and B and then spotting and stalking is a better option. Well,
no shit. You don't think so?
You paid for it. You got your 3 days of the wild African experience on 20,000 acres. You walked your ass numb, and that's the reality. If you just walk with no purpose, you walk with no purpose, you know?
That'd be tough.
If you're paying for that then I guess, whatever.
Oh.
I prefer to shit personally when I'm there.
So the put and take, it is very controversial, but I can tell you now, there's no way in hell that 70% of outfitters in South Africa go and hunt. You've hunted Namibia. We have a foot and mouth problem in South Africa. So a few years ago, 10 years ago, there was always this Namibia-South Africa fighting back and forth about fences, no fences, this and that and the other. Everybody must do what they are good at. I hunt Namibia myself. I hunt in Namibia between fences, and I also hunt on big concession areas. And the reality is that it is totally the same thing for me, in my opinion. I would think the animals inside the fences are a little bit more skittish, and it's a little bit more difficult to hunt because they have been chased before. So it is what it is. I'm not here as a South African bashing the other countries, but all the other countries like to bash us because of our fences, because of put and take, because of that. But where can you hunt today? A wild 50-inch buffalo or a wild 45-plus sable, or go look in the record books. Where can you hunt an 18 or a 19-inch springbuck? 10 years ago, I would go to the Kuoku-veld and hunt north of Upua in the Skeleton Coast, and we would hunt 16 and 17-inch springbucks. And I tell you now, you can book a 7-day, one springbuck hunt. you come home with one springbuck and you shot a 17-inch springbuck. And I tell you, that is the ultimate achievement, in my opinion. But never anywhere else in the world can you hunt that quality trophy if there wasn't put and take and if there wasn't breeding. And that is what makes South Africa, in a certain sense, greater than the rest. Because in 10 years' time, the average buffalo in all these free-range areas are going to be 38, between 36 and 38. Because if it moves from this hunting concession to that, if the herd migrates, moves through another concession, nobody's going to try to protect the 46er. They're going to shoot it. And if they keep on doing it for 20 years, that quality of trophies will be gone. But in South Africa, it will stay. So embrace what's good for your country and love what you have and don't bash the rest, because Tony de Bruin wants to hunt all over Africa, and I sell hunts for my clients all over Africa. And I tell the client, for this hunt, you're going to get a 38-inch buffalo if you're very lucky, but you're going to have the ultimate walking experience. With this buffalo, you're going to hunt this. And that's how it is. And let's embrace what we have.
And I'm fine with it. You know, that question wasn't slotted that way. That topic gets brought up a lot on all these hunting groups, right? And my point is, and I think it's problematic because the admins of those groups are pushing people towards, hey, do your research first. Do not hunt with an outfitter that practices put and take. Whether an outfitter uses put and take or not, I think it's financially irresponsible to try to run an operation where you can't replenish the game. The first 4 weeks of your hunting season, you've shot all your you don't. That's it. So if you want to work a month a year, so be it. That's fine. But it's not sustainable and it's not profitable that way. You can't do it.
If you're a well-established outfitter, and I'm not trying to blow smoke up my ass, somebody else's ass. At this stage where we are now on my land, I have at least 20 sables, 20 rowans, 15 Setsabees, quality trophies that I bought now at the end of the hunting season. I have 10 buffaloes on my land, big buffaloes, and now I'm taking a huge financial risk. I'm dropping $400,000-$500,000 into buying game now, so that I will have enough game for the first 3 months of the hunting of the next season. I start on the 27th of February. It is for me to hunt 700 animals. And listen, I drive up to 3 hours from my camp for certain species. It is not sustainable. It cannot be sustainable. If a client books a bushbuck, a Limpopo bushbuck, I go to Limpopo, I go walk the rivers. I have beautiful concessions where you hunt that one bushbuck in a lifetime. But if you come to hunt an impala, a springbuck, a gemsbuck, a wildebeest, a zebra, and a hartebeest, 99.9% on all the concessions you're going to hunt. Some of them were bought in. It has to happen. It's the only way you can maintain your genetic integrity. And that's why I put tags in some of the ears so that they don't kill all the good stuff. And number two, it's not sustainable. Except if you hunt, you're a purist. And I know many of these guys, and they are real purists. They hunt their 20 clients a year. They have 25,000 acres. A good example is Erkli Ratman from Blaukraan Safaris. All right? I don't think Erkli puts and takes anything on his ranch. But 10 years ago, Erkli had to buy buffaloes in, had to buy nyalas in, had to buy kudus in to get his place where it is. And till today, he has to buy shit in to enhance his genealogy, his integrity. But he doesn't have to put and take. He hunts his 50 or 60 clients a year. He has 45,000 hectares. That's a good example for the purist. The rest of us, a guy like me, Tony de Bruin, 35 years old, starting to become a professional hunter. I didn't get the silver spoon. Not saying that Erkli has, he didn't. But my daddy didn't give me a 10,000 hectare Kalahari farm. I had to buy it myself. I mean, I cannot afford 10,000 hectares. I have 2,000 hectares and I'm leasing it. That's how my business works. That's my business plan. I get involved in the hunting because I love hunting. But the reality is, to make hunting work and to make it a business, if you don't treat it like a business and you don't have stock and you don't keep inventory, you're not going to make it. You're going to go bankrupt. And I mean, you can be a purist and die of hunger, or you can be a capitalist like me, be a Donald Trump and do the stuff and get it done and do it to the best of your ability and give your client the best experience. That's what it is.
Well, and I think, and that's where I was going with it. I personally don't have a problem with it. I don't see any. I think one of the big things that happens is sable. I'll use a sable for an example. Yes. You bring a group of sable in, especially big breeder bulls that they've grown up in a smaller area. They're breeder bulls. They get turned out. Well, guess what? 5 days later, those sables, they're still pretty docile, right? They don't seem to, for whatever reason, and that's the one animal that I don't know why. And I've seen them being released out of the back of a truck, and 2 or 3 days later, you could still walk 20, 30 yards for them, and they don't get spooked. You release an Impala or a Kudu, that son of a bitch is gone right now, gone. But for whatever reason, that sable, he's just docile. Just doesn't get the urge to haul ass. And so I think the sable gives that part of the industry. People may say, oh, well, put and take, and they look at the sable and they think that that's every animal. No, the sables are just, in my opinion is, they're super chill to begin with. Like, you don't have to worry. Like, if you're going to go on a sable hunt and there's several sables there, you're going to get your sable, right? You're going to get into a place where you can be effective and shoot. It's not like a free range fucking kudu hunt where you may or may not catch up to that bastard 3 mountaintops away kind of thing. You're going to get a sable.
So I've hunted sable all over Africa and on huge free-range areas. The sable has a docile personality. It really, they are just, I call them a royal antelope. They are royal. They just, man, they own the place. Where the sable is, they just own it. Now, of course, a sable is number one. I call a sable here on my ranch number 1 parasite. Then an eland bull is number 2 parasite. Then a rowan, and then a kudu, number 4 parasite. If you put out feed, this time of the year, I have to put out feed. Number 1 parasite, somewhere sleeps at the feeder. A sable don't even go away. He just hangs there. That's his place. He's there. Then here comes the eland bull. The cows, they are a little bit sticky, but an eland bull, if you put out good feed, doesn't matter where you hunt in the world, the eland bull will come to feed, and a kudu bull will come to feed. And it is just what it is. But to come up for my friend the sable and the roan, number 1, they don't get hunted every day. So they are more expensive animals. But the reality is their personality. If you see, the only species that got extinct in South Africa is called the bluebuck. And it looks like a breed between a sable and a roan, and it lived in the Western Cape. And according to folklore, it was good meat. But the reason they got wiped out is they were stupid. They were just standing around. They didn't run away. So people wiped them out. It's easy killing. Will you rather die of hunger or kill the last bluebuck? It is what it is.
Faza. Looks like you guys backed the wrong horse. Oops.